wassalamu ala Rasulullah. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu. You're listening to Ramadan Radio Wolverhampton, 87.9 FM. My name is Yusuf Shafi, and we are presenting In Conversation with. Alhamdulillah. Today we have got three guests with us, all of whom are, I would say, experts and no doubt well qualified and what's the best word for it? I'll let them introduce themselves. We've got three guests, all of whom are going to be talking about their particular fields and talking about how they have been able to actually inspire others as well to get into those fields. I've got Atiya Ali, who's a psychotherapist and a community development worker. And Atiya is also one of our Radio Ramadan presenters as well. Assalamu alaikum, Atiya.
Walaikum salam.
Let me put your mic on first of all.
Walaikum salam.
A pleasure to have you here. We've also got Muhammad Rafi. Not the same Muhammad Rafi you would think.
No, indeed not.
But Muhammad Rafi was an IT consultant and program manager as well. And our third guest is Mr. Shahrul Hussain, who is from Birmingham and is on his way coming into the studio. And he's going to be talking about the British Islamic Library, which they're setting up in Birmingham. So, Alhamdulillah, today in conversation with Yusuf Shafi, what we're going to be focusing on the world of mental health and the world of psychotherapy and cognitive behavior therapy. We'll also be going to looking at IT and artificial intelligence. We're also going to be looking at the world of computing and the impact that has on our lives. And then also we're going to, in the last stint of the show, we're going to look at the role of Brother Shahrul and his charity and how they're setting up the Islamic Library there in Birmingham. As always, please do feel free to phone in or do feel free to WhatsApp with any comments. We're more than happy for listeners to contribute. Really important that you feel engaged and you're able to contribute into these different... I've just got a message come through telling us that we're not live. That may well be a glitch. Can't hear on the radio, they're saying, apparently. Okay, we are streaming.
Yeah, if it's online, then sometimes they have to refresh the page. It should work.
Yes, you may need to refresh the page. Oh, we've got a phone call in there. Okay, let's take a phone call. Hello. Hello.
I can't hear you on the radio. Are you running live?
We are running live, yes. Maybe you need to refresh your... is it not on FM at the moment?
No.
Okay. We'll try and see what's
Thank
going on
you.
with a bit of a technical glitch going on, listeners. Not to worry. Anyway, let's move on because I think we are certainly on Radio Co and we are certainly on streaming as well. So we'll make a start. Atiya, how are you?
I'm okay.
And how is Ramadan going?
Alhamdulillah, it's going well.
Good. Do you want to get closer to the mic because
Yeah, sure.
listeners will hear us better? Hopefully, if we do it that way.
Okay.
The world of mental health has, I think, in the recent, certainly last 10 or 15 years, gone through a big change from the point of view of perceptions.
Mm-hmm.
Prior to that, there was always a stigma related with mental health. And I think in around about 2005, 2008, or thereabouts, we had, from government, a big change in ethos. And the whole idea around how mental health should be discussed, and people came out, and we had celebrities coming out talking about mental health and how they were affected by mental health and the impact on them. And that led to a big national debate and a big idea that people do suffer stress, people do suffer anxiety, they do suffer depression, and then the more difficult and complicated neurological illnesses, schizophrenia, obsessive compulsive disorder, etc., etc. From your role, working as a mental health worker within Telford, within the community as well, how have you found that stigma has been reduced, or does it still exist within the Pakistani, the Muslim, the BAME communities?
Yeah, so it's a very wide question, I suppose. I think where to start from is thinking about this introduction of the increasing access to psychological therapies. This was around 2008. It's a government initiative, and you're quite right, things began to change. And as a whole, it was important to focus on how can we increase access for not just BAME community, but generally for the community. And this form of therapy is a stepped care approach, so increasing access to psychological therapies is also known as IAPT. Now, IAP services are based locally in different areas across nationally, and especially in England. And what they focus on is looking at anxiety and depression, and other disorders, psychological disorders, so things like OCD, etc., and how we could encourage communities to engage. So promotion is key. Making people aware of difficulties and disorders so that they can relate to that and they know that they need that expertise support. With regards to BAME communities in particular, there's less of a take-up. So part of my role as a community development worker is going outreach work, so going out into the community, working with communities to help them increase their well-being, their emotional well-being, in particular looking at their mental health. And looking at the roles that they might have in the community, things like carers. So carers take on a lot of stress and anxiety. So yeah, there's lots being done out in the community in terms of encouraging access.
And do you think that mental health issues are disproportionately affected by BAME communities, or is it comparable to the rest of the wider population?
Well, I don't have any statistics on me right now, but in terms of access, it's varied. So it depends where you are in the country, and the population, the local population in terms of access. We find that actually in the area that I work, there's a good proportion of BAME communities that are accessing services. So some good work is being done there.
No, that's good. That's excellent. And again, are we in a situation where you think BAME communities still exist in that old-fashioned view that mental health issues is related to jinnat, or it's related to witchcraft, or it's related to somebody doing some evil deed or bad things, and therefore now they're being punished?
So I'm currently doing a piece of research on looking at comparing British Pakistani communities in terms of their conceptualization of depression. So how do they understand depression? What is their understanding of depression? And in particular, I'm focusing on British people who are settled, comparing them to newly settled communities. Because what I've noticed in the focus groups already is that there is a comparable difference. Some people who are newly arriving are more aware of depression, whereas those who are settled and have been here for a while probably didn't get that education back in Pakistan, let's say. So I'm talking about the Pakistani community in particular. And there is an added stigma around, being possessed, and how that can play a role in becoming poorly mentally ill. So yeah, I agree with you that there's added stigma around that for communities.
So how have you, in your role, been able to sort of combat some of those barriers and some of those stigmas? What were the obstacles you found with regards to trying to approach families, for example, and informing them that, it's a biological problem, or it's something which is environmental, or it's something which is nothing to do with deeds, or nothing to do with particularly any witchcraft, as it were, or superstitious ideas?
Yeah, so there's several areas really that are focused, and one of them is this piece of research, and hopefully, inshallah, this will help in terms of understanding communities and allowing people to be aware of what British Pakistani communities think about mental health in particular, and creating some sort of intervention, let's say a leaflet or something around that, or an intervention of some sort. However, with regards to my day-to-day work in terms of community development work, I do go out into the community and have these conversations quite openly about the stigma around mental health and this focus on being possessed, and it's really, really good that the imams locally do take that on board, and they join me in mental health events, and they do stress that people should seek support for mental health as much as they do for physical health, and again kind of demystifying some of those myths.
Okay, and as a woman, and being in the world of mental health, you no doubt have issues around barriers from approaching, for example, males. Or would you find that easy? Is that something which is not a barrier? Maybe that's a misconception on my side.
Well, So if we're talking specifically with with regards to Muslim communities, was that where your question is directed?
Well, just
In terms
generally
of-
BAME communities,
Well,
I think.
generally, as a Muslim woman, I have no qualms in speaking to men, and today I'm in the studio with three gentlemen. So that's not a bother for me. That's not a pressure for me at all. And as the Khadijos out there working with lots of men,
Mashallah.
so it's not something that I find that prevents me from doing my work and my role. With regards to the Muslim community specifically, I find that they shy away rather than myself, so perhaps I have more confidence than them, or they just feel like sometimes they need a Muslim man to come and have the same conversation that I'm having. So if I'm talking about, let's say, taking an anxiety management group into the community, they'll say, is there a man available, or could a man join you perhaps? So yeah, I think that those are the subtle differences. But working one-to-one with Muslim men in the therapy room, it's never an issue. Initially, I find people take time to open up and share their experiences and their concerns, but eventually they're able to talk.
Okay, so as somebody in the community, man, you're one of our presenters here on Radio Ramadan Wolverhampton, and no doubt you have often people coming up to you and saying, well, how do I become a mental health worker? How do I become a community psychotherapist or involved with cognitive behaviour therapist? You're saying there isn't an issue with regards to you personally working there, but young people out there who are listening to this, what is the advice you'd give to them? How is the way they would maybe combat those issues if they were to come about in their families? And then what are the routes to get in?
So are we talking about kind of gender specific, and if there are females out there who want to take up the career of working in mental health,
Exactly.
in particular one-to-one therapy,
Yes.
etc., and how they can combat kind of that issue? I mean, I think that's really an important necessary topic, I suppose, but it's not one that I've really broached. There's been times where I've thought, I'm in this room with a male client, how could this be perceived perhaps by communities? But at the same time, you're working in a building, for me it's an NHS building, the Midlands Partnership Foundation Trust is who I work for, and there's lots of other people in the same building as you, and I think it's just as every other job. You might be working, I don't know, in a business where there's only you and another person who comes into the business during that day. I don't think it's an issue. I think for parents, I think they should encourage their children to take up this career. It's a very rewarding career. Supporting someone feel better emotionally and with their mental health and be able to live to their full. It's a very rewarding career, and I would say there's Islamic principles there in terms of caring for your community and giving back to the community. And actually, let me plug my show here, which is every Tuesdays we've been doing midday moments over the Ramadan period. We've got a 4-part series, and I'm talking to an organisation called Ihsan in Bradford, a psychotherapist from there, about anxiety and depression and how it's affected within Muslim communities, and how there's Islamic therapy that brings in du'as and other ways of looking after yourselves. And I think it's really interesting. So if there was an issue, we wouldn't have these universities teaching Islamic, integrating Islamic psychology, and that's very much out there in terms of training.
And is it the more traditional routes of education to get in, A-levels, GCSEs, or are there alternatives to that as well?
Right, so there's many routes of getting into mental health, and actually quite a lot of people decide to change their careers later on and kind of retrain, and it is an area that people come into from many different backgrounds. I could tell you a little bit about my career path, which was starting off actually as a mentor, teaching assistant, and just building my way up gradually alongside, committing myself to family. And I was able to take that typical route in terms of A-level, undergrad, masters, etc., and then come into psychotherapy training. However, I find that had I not been working at the same time as doing all of these things, it probably would have been more difficult to get into these fields. So if you're working and you're gaining work experience along the way, that's a helpful way of getting into mental health, and then eventually working in mental health. But also for other people, You can be trained as a CBT therapist, which is a cognitive behavioural therapist, working for the IAT teams that I mentioned earlier. If you have a background in teaching, social work, nursing, and other fields, other related fields, you can actually apply for that training. It's a 1-year intense training led by many universities. So you could go through that path, that route. There are other people who work as support workers, etc., in mental health, or even caring roles that go on to kind of build a portfolio of supporting others in the community. It might be volunteering for Samaritans, the local masjid, community centres, and then they're able to apply for courses that are mental health based, like basic skills in counselling, and build their way up that way. So there's many different routes. But if anybody wants to speak to me about that, they're welcome.
Okay, that's great to know. And coming back to the mental health therapies themselves, I mean, they're commonly called talking therapies. And the idea that you can sit down with a patient and you can talk them out of some of their ideas. How simple is it? Is it literally about talking in that sense? Or would you be of the old school where you think, well, actually, no, we need some chemicals as well. We need to give them drugs, and those drugs will actually work with the biochemistry, the neurological issues going on in their brains, the chemical imbalances, and all of that.
Well, personally, so suppose not talking as a therapist. For me personally, I prefer talking therapies as a first port of call. I always feel that people should, try their best to try and access some sort of therapy, whether that's through the NHS, whether that's privately, whichever way that is. I think that's really important to try and do that and try and get that support. However, it really depends on the severity of the illness. It depends on at what point someone is accessing the services. So they might need medication to support them in engaging in therapy. So it could be a mixed, and actually the NICE guidelines, which is the National Institute for Clinical Excellence, suggests that a mix of medication and therapies is kind of the best for anxiety and depression.
Okay, good. Brother Rafi, you had a comment or a question for Sister Atia?
Yeah, a question for Atia. By the way, that's been really interesting what you've said so far. Atia, I've found within the community, talking about mental health is generally a taboo subject.
Yeah.
And people tend to sweep it underneath the carpet.
Absolutely.
And I've come across it so many times. And it's the question really is, from your perspective and from your organisation, what is it that we can do to educate our community to in a sense, to accept the inevitable, that there is a mental issue and something needs to be done, rather than sweeping it underneath the carpet and dealing with it when really it's a mega issue.
Yeah, absolutely. There's lots that can be done, but at the same time, there's lots that is being done. I don't know about Wolverhampton locally as much, but I know in Shropshire and in Telford, where I'm actually based in terms of my work, I do go out there and speak to communities on a daily basis in different areas. So it could be that I could come to the school and speak to parents there, etc., masjid groups, etc. But you're right, we do need to kind of take the stigma away and encourage people to access services, just like you would access a service if you break your leg, or hurt yourself, or, if there's a physical symptom. It's in exactly the same process that people should access mental health services. The stigma within our communities is rather unfortunate, actually, and you're quite right. I have lots of people who contact me, actually, from our communities, wider within the Wolverhampton communities, let's say, and even wider, that contact me and say, I have a relative who has this issue. What kind of therapy would be helpful? We'd like to work privately. We'd like to go private. What kind of support would I need to have? And people are gradually opening up, but it's very subtle. It's very quiet. It's very hidden. People don't really talk openly about their experiences of mental health, and it's rather unfortunate. But I think as within the general community, it's making a difference slowly with people that are being able to talk about mental health. I think the same thing will happen for our communities. It will take time, but we're making good steps towards that. And IAPT is one of those services that's helping to do that. And hence this research that I'm doing at the moment will hopefully create some kind of a tool that will enable others to, remove that stigma and access services at earlier stage, because unfortunately our communities access services at later stage, and need quite severe intervention, in terms of psychiatric care.
Yeah, and I think you're absolutely right. One of the things that I find within our community is that we don't talk enough about things, and then it's the old classic, isn't it? I won't put my hand up to ask the question because maybe I will look a bit dumb. But actually, when you find out that everybody's got
just
those
to
problems,
interrupt you there, I do apologise. We're coming up to the break, and inshallah, listeners will be back after the ad break at 6:30, and then we'll carry on
Thank
with the conversation around where we've started. Jazakallah.
thank you.
Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu. You're listening to Yusuf Shafi in conversation with. This is Radio Ramadan Wolverhampton 87.9 FM. Listeners, there may well have been some technical issues in the first stint of our show today. I was getting some messages and some WhatsApp calls, etc., telling me that the FM is not being heard. I don't know if that's all across the whole of Wolverhampton or if certain parts of it. Quite what's going on, I'm not sure. Certainly, the Facebook I think is working fine, and the live stream is going out as well. We were talking to Atia Ali, who's a psychotherapist working in Telford, Shropshire, and she was just talking to us about the careers and how to get involved with it, and some of the barriers and obstacles and issues faced by BAME communities with regards to mental health. I think, Atia, just to bring you back, I think just to summarise what you were saying, it's essentially that a lot of communities are still suffering in silence. A lot of people still adhere to that stigma, unfortunately, and are not able to overcome that, are not able to reach out. And the important thing for them to do is to reach out early and to make sure that their mental health is supported. As you were saying, much like their physical health would be, so if they've got a headache or any other ailments, they would go to their doctors. They should do the same with regards to the mental health issues. If families are affected, and it's a very common ailment, it's a very common issue, mental health. If families who are affected by this, what would you suggest be their first port of call? Where should they go to first to seek help?
So like you said, it is a very common issue, and I would say 1 out of 3 people suffer from a mental health problem at any point in their life. And I think in terms of access, the first point of call would be to speak to your GP.
Okay.
So speak to your GP about, symptoms. Tell them about how you've been feeling, whether it's anxiety, depression, OCD, whether it's trauma, whatever the issue might be. Have a conversation with your GP. Trust your GP to give you the best advice, and hopefully some of that would include accessing therapy. So depending on the level of severity, they will refer you accordingly. Some services like IAPT services, they actually accept self-referrals. So if you Google IAPT, you'll find the IAPT service in your area, and you could probably self-refer.
Okay, doc. Thank you very much. Now, before we leave the conversation about mental health issues, Atia, you wanted to mention your show, so
Yeah,
I'll let you do that.
And just before I do that, let me just say that therapy is available in different languages. So in terms of interpreters, they're provided. So if you have a loved one, you could get them to access service that way. So I suppose what I wanted to talk to you about was my guest who's joining my show on Saturday, on the 1st of May at 1 o'clock. Her name is Poppy Jaman. She is a Bangladeshi in terms of her heritage, and she's coming to talk about her mental health experiences, as well as some of the great work that she's done, and as a result she's received an OBE. So please do join in on Saturday, give us some support.
It sounds like an amazing show, and most of your shows, I have been listening to them, are actually very, very good. So you're doing a wonderful job on Radio Ramadan, Atia. Thank you. So listeners, there you have it. Listen into Atia Ali's show, where she's got this special guest who's got an OBE as well, so I'm sure it'll be very informative and enlightening. Let's move on to our next good guest. I should also mention, since the break, Dr. Shahrul Hussain from Islamic Library in Birmingham. The full title of the library is...
Well, it's a National Islamic Studies Library.
National Islamic Studies.
But the main organisation is the Ibn Rushd Centre of Excellence for Islamic Research.
Mashallah, mashallah. So you've joined us in the studio, and we'll be talking to you about that. But before we go on to that, let's introduce Muhammad Rafi, who is a IT consultant and a program manager.
Well, thank you very much for having me.
Can I ask you, please, Mr. Rafi, to get closer to the mic so we can hear you well? There's some issues with the FM today anyway, so the last thing we want is not to be heard from yourself.
No.
So, Muhammad Rafi, you've been working for a number of years in the world of IT and computing. It is a field which is very diverse, and there's a plethora of different careers and different opportunities within it. But before we get into those, what I want to explore with you is the whole concept around IT and computing, and how do those two differ? So where do they overlap and where do they differ?
Assalamu alaikum to all your Ramadan listeners. In relation to your question, computing and IT actually get used interchangeably in common language, but you're absolutely right to make a distinction. Computing itself is about computing hardware and computers that are used to, in a sense, algorithm-based computers. So computers are computing is about the nuts and bolts of computers, whereas and the programming of those. So you can have computers hardware, the bolts and nuts of it and program those computers, but it's a totally different field. Whereas IT is more user orientated computing. It's to benefit society, public services, your businesses. So IT is really orientated at the user. So it's more user facing. So that is the sort of very broad difference between IT
Okay.
and computing.
So we're often told that the world of IT and computing is going to take over, and most jobs of the future will be in the world of computing, in particular artificial intelligence. But also there's this big vast area of IT, which is networking and websites and all of that. So could you please give listeners a little bit of insight of what exactly is networking, what is website development, and what is artificial intelligence?
Okay, so let me just take that and remind me if I just go on rabbiting, because IT is such a passionate subject with me. So I love IT. So the question around remind me again. Your first question was on
Networking.
networking. So networking is really about and I do want to make a distinction between networking as in networking personal networking and networking as in computing networking. So computer networks are basically about getting computers to talk to each other, and really the basis of what we know as being the internet is actually computers being able to talk to themselves. So computer networking is about networking computers, joining them together. Now, one of the big things that's happened recently is that in days gone by, I'd say maybe 10, 15 years ago, all computers basically were on premises, and there were computers needed to talk to each other. So there was what we call local area networks. Okay, so those computers were able to talk to each other because there was a local network and there was a physical connection. There used to be a twisted wire, the telephone wire, literally linking each computer around your premises. What's happened over the years is because of the concept of being able to use broadband networking, broadband messaging, that has opened up a totally different field of computing, what we now call internet. And the internet is now, so where you had local area networks in local areas, now you can communicate, you can link those networks remotely. So I can be in Birmingham, I can be in Pakistan, I can be in Azad Kashmir, I can be anywhere in the world, and those computers are able to talk to each other. And the concept of the fact that they're able to talk to each other has actually borne the birth of the internet. And now what we can do is obviously use the internet and use the power of the fact that where before we were limited to how many bits and bytes that we could push over the wire. Now with the advent of broadband, we can stream masses, your program, films and everything, masses of information over the network. And that's been the big game changer, is the fact that we are now able to transmit huge amounts of data over those networks. And of course, you know, as I keep on saying, the internet is an offspring of that networking ability.
Okay, and then the world of artificial intelligence, how does that differ then?
So that you know, artificial intelligence has been around for decades. And it's become more sort of mainstream recently, and what was deemed to be let's look at what artificial intelligence is first. So let me try and it's actually very difficult to define what artificial intelligence is, generally speaking, which is why you have multitude of definitions around what artificial intelligence is. Artificial intelligence, in a sense, tries to mimic human behavior and human thinking. That's what artificial intelligence tries to do. In its very basic format, in the early days, the way that used to be done was that we'd have decision trees. So basically, it's like if you imagine a tree with its branches, with leaves and branches, and then leading to a trunk, what you'd have is an answer and question session, but ultimately the answer would lead into the trunk. So there's a lot of questions and a response and an answer, and the multitude of those questions and answers leads to questions and answers leads to the answer. So that's a decision tree. And in principle, that's what artificial intelligence was based on initially. But that is not artificial intelligence. Artificial intelligence is actually about computers being able to make a decision for themselves.
What they call machine learning.
So machine learning is literally is machines or computers being able to, using algorithms, being able to learn and make those decisions themselves. So it's a process of ongoing learning, decision making, recognizing patterns, and then coming to ultimately a decision using artificial intelligence.
So the picture that they paint often about artificial intelligence, it will live in a world where the grass will be cut by robots, the milk will be delivered by robots, our shopping will arrive to us, even our food will be cooked for us by robots, the washing will be done by robots. Everything will be robotic, and we will just be in this world, and everything will be easy. Do you think that's far away, or? I mean, our cars are being driven automatically now, aren't they?
I'll give you a very simple example why I'm not threatened by that. There was a time when computing initially took off, and we thought, well, everything's going to be done by computing, or everything's going to be done by robots, and everybody's going to lose their jobs. And all of those things have been in now certainly I've been in IT for more than 30 years. And these things have been around for a long, long time. And all they've done is basically released human beings time to do other things and let us become more productive in other things. So yes, those rudimentary or those repetitive jobs, and even maybe in times to come, intellectual jobs or artificial intelligence jobs will be done by computers and by robots. But my feeling is that all that will do is it won't make us redundant as human beings, and we're not going to become a vegetable sitting on seats. All that's going to do is release us to release more energy, more of our times to do more other exciting things and other things that I know, inshallah, will be productive to humanity.
So the world of IT and computing is not just on the horizon, as you say. It's been with us for the past 30, 40 years and beyond, maybe before then. From your point of view, I know you've been very instrumental and very effective in working with community. You've been engaging local people here at Wolverhampton. I know you had a little project running with the Wolverhampton Masjid, Aqsa Masjid as well. And you've been working on the international field as well in Pakistan, and you've been trying to develop IT and try to develop courses and try to develop venues, academies within those locations. How have you found that work? And how responsive or receptive have the communities been to you?
It's an interesting question. It's a mixed bag, actually. Initially we get a very enthusiastic response, but then it fades away. And I think a lot of that is to do with, again, it's same as Atiyah's situation. We just need to educate people. People need to recognize that it's actually happening now. But just as a predictor, just broad brush, 80 to 90% of your jobs in the next 5 years, say, are going to have an IT contribution. The very fact that you're sitting behind those screens, how effectively we're getting them to work relies on your IT knowledge, and makes you and how comfortable you are with that IT knowledge. So to me, IT is going to be everywhere. It is everywhere now, to the point that we don't even realise that we've been artificial intelligence is around us. So Alexa, all of those, Bixby, all of those applications that use the knowledge that we put into our computers, they're then using artificial intelligence to reformulate those that information, that data. So to me, the biggest challenge that we have within the community is actually recognizing how important IT is, and IT is not just about the internet. That actually is that's just a face, a front of IT. The real core of IT and what's going on is quite dynamic, and I really would like some of our ladies, females, girls to get involved in IT, because it's a huge opportunity for our youngsters to get in there. And hopefully you'll ask me the question later on, Yusuf. The opportunities are there for people to learn from home. I can tell you that using the internet, just having the internet and a laptop, these days you don't need overly paid tutors. Sorry. To do the job, you can actually learn a lot from home.
I
Yourself.
often get told I'm redundant as a teacher.
No, you will never become redundant, because as I said, I'm sure your time will be used in some other respect to do good work and do the same.
Cutting the grass.
But you know, in at the moment we don't get a lot of attraction in IT from the female, from the ladies and from the girls, and I think we should, because the opportunities are there, because you can learn from home. There are some terrific online courses in IT, and the other thing is that you can actually do IT at home now, because there's a general trend towards working from home.
It's family friendly, isn't it, from that point of view?
Remote working.
So just to pick up on that theme, and the idea behind BAME communities not being engaged with computing and artificial intelligence and the world of IT as much as they should be, it's a cultural thing, isn't it? Because I know certainly when I was growing up, parents said to me, do science, do biology, do chemistry, become a doctor, become a lawyer, become an accountant, and then if they don't do those things, they go into the world of business, or they go into the world of, I suppose to a limited extent, they've set up businesses, or they go into degrees in business. So how can we instill amongst our parents the idea that this is a new horizon, this is a new opportunity, and there's very good lucrative salaries? I mean, I think IT professionals are now paid. The typical idea is that you'll be rich if you become a dentist or if you become a doctor. I think the world of IT now is paying a lot more than that, and people can potentially earn a lot more in the world of computing and IT.
But that really is something that I think we can focus on and let people know that, don't be scared of IT. What people used to think was that you needed to get really high level IT computing qualification. You got scared of going into, like, people dislike maths. I mean, I don't know about you, but generally you mention maths to kids and they shy away. Whereas actually in IT, in computing, once you actually get into it, it really isn't scary at all. And gone are the days where they used to look for hardcore computing degrees or qualifications. These days, so long as you can show that you're an asset, you don't need the degrees, and you don't need master's degrees like that I had to do to get into these courses. You can get into these courses, you can get onto these lines really quickly. But as I said, the opportunities here that I didn't have, that you've got now, the youngsters have got now, is you've got huge amounts of information at your fingertips, and very good information, training courses at your fingertips. That's one thing. And the other thing is that you can be working remotely, you can do things freelance. There's huge amounts of opportunities. I just wish that and I hope that our community recognises that this is a good field to get into. And just to let you know, you were talking about salaries. I won't divulge too much about my own background and my salaries, but it was funny that there was a stage when with my consultancy, I was getting paid more than a prime minister, and
that very impressive.
That to me is that that was because I was in IT, and I wish I could have actually told other people, look, there's huge opportunities here for you. But I will say those opportunities have probably been slightly diluted now, because so don't all of you look for getting IT roles that pay you better than the Prime Minister. The reason why is that I was in a unique situation, that IT was at an early stage. IT
But I
was
think
at premium.
those unique situations now exist elsewhere within the world of computing. So,
Yeah.
for example, within artificial intelligence or within different aspects of IT, it's just shifted from one aspect to another, hasn't it?
I agree with you.
And as long as our community are aware of that,
Yeah.
and
So-
they can speak to good people like yourself and
so-
get that information, get those skills, and like you say, I think it's not about necessarily doing all the A levels and the degrees. It's about having the courses and the skills.
IT these days, even when I use the word IT now, I struggle, because computing and IT almost sound like archaic to me. The world of computing and information technology is so vast these days. It's so broad that you can pick anything that you like and draw some passion out of it in IT. It's such a broad subject these days. So yes, if I wanted to be a programmer in computing, so I'd be looking to a developer or a programmer. I'd be looking to hone in on my programming languages, like, for example, Python for artificial intelligence, Java, JavaScripting, SQL, C++. So those are the courses, those are the programming languages that I'd be looking at if you wanted to start at the basic level. But as I said, there is so much in IT these days that you don't even have to learn a language, computing language, to get into IT. You just need to be, for example, an accountant, or even solicitors these days. They're using IT to improve their business process. They have improved their business processes through using IT. So IT can be, as long as you've got a passion in something and there's an IT associated subject with it, I'd say pursue it, because you will do well. And yes, payments are a premium for those that are niche areas, like, for example, we talked about artificial intelligence, machine learning, and data analysis, data scientists. Those are premium jobs which will pay you really good, lucrative salaries. But they're niche jobs. There's a lot more opportunities at the lower end of those not so niche jobs for you to get yourself into IT. But you must have a passion.
You must have a passion, and as you said, it's about, especially I think for our females, if they, and for that matter males as well, if they want family-friendly work, if they want to be able to work from home, if they want to have flexibility, not necessarily have to go 9 to 5 Monday to Friday. The world of IT does open lots of opportunities for them. So the take-home message from yourself is about widen your horizons, learn about the different opportunities, and look at where the future's going. Most of the jobs in the future will be in the world of computing and IT. So try to learn more about it and get involved with it.
Yeah.
Listeners, you're listening to 87.9 FM Ramadan Radio Wolverhampton. We're coming to our ad break, and after the ad break, we will continue In Conversation with Yusuf Shafi, where we'll be talking to Dr. Shahrul Hussain and our other guests as well. Thank you very much. Alhamdulillahi wassalatu wassalamu ala Rasulillah. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuhu. You're listening to Ramadan Radio Wolverhampton 87.9 FM. My name is Yusuf Shafi, and you're listening live to In Conversation with Yusuf Shafi. Alhamdulillah, we are back after a break. We've heard two wonderful speakers, Sister Atiya Ali and Brother Muhammad Rafi, both of whom were two experts and absolutely amazing conversations we had with them about their world of work. First of all, within the world of mental health with Sister Atiya Ali, and with Brother Muhammad Rafi with the world of IT and computing. We're moving now to our third and final guest for tonight's show with Dr. Shahrul Hussain. Dr. Shahrul Hussain is from the Ibn Rushd Center of Excellence for Islamic Research, and he's going to talk to us all about the wonderful initiative that they've decided to embark upon and set up in Birmingham, being the Islamic Library. So, Dr. Shahrul Hussain, Assalamu alaikum and welcome to the studio. I know you were slightly rushed to come in and I think you got trapped in traffic, unfortunately, but we're really glad that you can make it and we can have a conversation with you regards to the Islamic Library. So, first of all, I'll ask you, how did you come up with the idea and the concept? What were your inspirations for the Islamic Library from the point of view of, why did you want to set it up? And how has that journey been so far?
Wa alaikum salam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh, and to you, and assalamu alaikum to all your listeners, and Ramadan Mubarak. Thank you, first of all, for having me on this show. Where and how did we come about the idea of the Islamic Library? Our initial ambition or aim was to establish a research centre. Now, what we thought is that having a very, very large and the most extensive collection of Islamic literature in Europe and UK might be, how can I put it, a bit of a waste of resources when you have 10 to 15 researchers just engaged in research and a whole building is just left empty. So the idea was, well, what can we do to make this research centre more interesting? So then we parked the idea of just having a research centre, and the idea changed and said we looked in society and we always had this passion, but I think we had just a eureka moment, and when exactly this eureka moment took place is difficult to pinpoint. But it was when we realised, if we look what's going on in society now, and I think I'm going to fall out with Brother Muhammad Rafi, our IT expert, simply because I have to confess that I'm a committed Luddite. So we're not probably going to get along. But here's the problem. From when a child is able to navigate a mobile phone, what we do as parents, we put a mobile phone on his hand, playing some games or doing something on the mobile phone. This child then grows up. And if you see some of the children, how addicted they are to the mobile phone, it's worrying. What we need to be doing now, I'm not saying that all parents need to take away the mobile phone from the children and the iPads and all these other technology, but what they need to be doing is replacing these gadgets with books. I remember as a child, we used to go to our local library and we used to spend time in the local library. This concept is dying. And if you look at now, this problem with literature, this problem with learning. So our whole idea is, well, now let's scrap the research centre idea and let's try to incorporate it into a building which is more of a community hub. And that's going to have multifarious education activities, and it's going to engage the community. It's going to provide a safe space. It's going to, which we spoke about mental health, and this is on our top of my minds. Well, in particular, men, perhaps they're out, and I just don't want to kind of stereotype and kind of genderize this thing, but if you look at within the BAME community, a lot of the women folk are stuck at home and looking perhaps after the in-laws for whatever reason, good or bad, whatever they are stuck, and that's what the situation is, or they're looking after the kids. What time do they get? What area and what space do they get to sit down and just have a bit of a time where they can meet other people and or just meet up with a friend, or even just have some quiet time sitting down and doing some reading? We need to be creating that. And that was the idea of having an educational facility to bring a library. And library is an important part of our heritage, our Islamic heritage. And it's important because if we look in history, we find how, from the first revelation, and this is something I want to point out to the listeners, you know what Allah revealed to Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam wasn't something by accident. It was by design. Every word Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala said was meant, and it meant to deliver a particular message. So my question is, the first thing Allah told Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam was the word Iqra. He commanded him to read. Why didn't Allah command Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam to believe or pray or be good or anything else? Why the word read? And that's a command for us to ponder over and for us to think, because reading really is and learning is the premise. It is the foundation for the advancement of any civilization, any people. Without learning to read, without educating ourselves, without teaching ourselves, we cannot possibly attain closeness to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala.
So, Brother Shahrul, this Islamic library, it's not just going to be a book repository, is it?
No.
It's going to have many floors and have many different departments. So please take us on a little tour of your library,
Okay.
but
So
very briefly.
I will. I'll try to. The idea is to make a library relevant to the 21st century. If we look at it now, libraries are a very, very unpopular place, and we want to revive the importance of a library. How important library was when we were children. So the library will have a nice, very, very lush top-end cafe for people who just don't want to come to the library, want to sit down and do a bit of work or have a business meeting. That part of a cafe is open. Then there's going to be the first floor where it's going to have 3 or 4 age demographics. So you got a toddler section, then you're going to have the teenager section, and you're going to have the more senior aged people section, and it's going to be done in such a way where nobody gets in each other's way, and then you can have a quiet research reading area where people who are dedicated to reading, students who are at university want a quiet place to sit down and do some reading, do their essays, do their assignments, or anybody else that wants to come and use it. So there'll be 2 floors, and it will have the most extensive collections of Islamic literature, as well as literature from different genres. And then we're going to have a conferencing suite. An office is to let, but the conferencing suite will be open to people. Our idea is to get excellent academics and speakers engaging with the community and delivering inspirational talks, etc. We also want to make it a training center, a dedicated training center for imams and scholars. And if I can just pause on that and explain why that is important. Our first speaker, Sister Atiya, spoke about mental health. You know how important it is to train ulamas, imams. It's such an important one, because in the community, the first port of call people have, even if it's got to do with the worldly affairs. You'd be surprised the amount of stuff that have not got to do with religion that come to my doorstep. So the first port of call people go to is the mosque and the mosque imam. Now, my question is, if Sister Atiya were to ask me now, well, what do you know about mental health, etc., 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 I'll say absolute zero. And that's a failure. And the failure is that as a community, we fail to perhaps train the scholars and the imams, create awareness, bring it to their attention, give them some training. And that space is completely absent. We need to do that. You want to say something?
Yeah, could I just say that actually there are some mental health trainings specifically for imams that we did many years ago, so people can access that quite easily.
Brilliant, thank you. So that's information that we need to have. So if there is a kind of like a national institution and there is a centralized information point which kind of like disseminates this information, we find that it's easier to share this information, and everybody know, well, what's our first protocol for some. This is the place. Let's see if they have any information on that. So these are the important things that we need to have there. And another important thing is media. Now here's where I start to contradict myself. Just a second ago, I kind of like had a go at Brother Muhammad Rafi about technology. But it doesn't matter how much of a Luddite I am. Okay, the world is moving in the direction of technology. I guarantee you this. I never will believe that teachers, okay, would be redundant. It doesn't matter what. You're not going to get an artificial or a robot teaching students. Doesn't matter how the advanced the technology is. But I can tell you this now: to engage with the students. Sooner or later, everything will be done via these cartoons. So I can imagine now in the maktab when children are taught, okay, programs are going to be used. So how do you, for example, the dua for eating, the dua for going to the toilet, the dua for wearing clothes, etc. It's all going to be done by cartoon. So we need to develop our own films, our own cartoons, our own TV stations, etc., etc. And we need to equip people with skills to do that. And we need a place where we can do it, a state-of-the-art place where we can actually achieve this.
Mashallah.
I hope that's it was slightly a bit of a brief, longer than a brief one, but I hope I managed to encapsulate what I'm trying to say.
Well, it sounds like a fascinating building, and I suppose that's the point of what we're starting off with. It's the building, and then what you're going to then incorporate within the building sounds amazing as well. It sounds like a massive investment. What is the overall project going to be worth at the end?
Our architects have told us about £8 million, but let's just round it off to 10. That's what the
But this is going to be a centre of excellence for essentially the whole of Europe,
correct,
if not the world.
Well, it's going to be our National Islamic Studies Library, but our aim is to make it have the largest, most extensive collection of Islamic literature, definitely in the United Kingdom and in Europe. That's our ambition. And
of course, that literature will be in a lot of different languages: English, Arabic, Urdu,
correct,
etc., Persian, Turkish.
Primarily to the Arabic and English,
okay,
because our readership would be of those background, but there will be collections on Urdu and Persia, etc.
Brother Rafi.
Yes, Cheryl was saying, I'm sure you're not a Luddite. It doesn't sound as if you're a Luddite. But one thing I will say to you, and you need to bear in mind, I think you've already touched on it, and that is that if I give somebody a knife, they can do two things with it. Mm-hmm. They can actually do somebody some real harm, mm-hmm, or they can use it actually to build a house, do something really useful. Yeah. I often see IT in the same way. Some people use IT in the most really awkward of ways, and sometimes people, and most of the time, people use IT really well. And I think, from, say, for example, as a lay person, if I knew that there was an Islamic library available somewhere in Birmingham, the first thing I'd like to be able to do is actually maybe even take a virtual tour of that library and see what services it could offer to me. So I think the point that I'm trying to make is the example that you gave about children and possibly the bad behaviour they may get enticed into using mobile phones. I'll just seal that with the example of the knife. Okay, we can use things in a very productive way, and I think there's a lot of potential in making sure the Islamic library, or as well as it being a physical book library, is also an environment where it can be very IT friendly, I'm sure.
Well, just to come back to that, absolutely. I mean, that's my personal opinion. Me and technology, we have this weird relationship. But absolutely, this library will have state-of-the-art IT facilities. It doesn't matter what my personal view is. The world is, as you put it, going towards technology. We need IT. The e-resources we can have as well is going to be par excellence. That's our ambition. So all these things we need to kind of like incorporate within the library.
And I'm just thinking to myself, it's a wonderful opportunity for us to be able to show the British community of how the Muslims in the UK are a confident community, well established, and we're putting something back. We're actually developing an institute here which will inform, educate, and allow Muslims and non-Muslims, because it's open to the public, to be able to actually participate in a wonderful project. not just work of dawah, but a work of actually opening our arms up to the host community and saying, this is Islam, this is modern Islam, and this is what we're about. So from that point of view, it's got an amazing concept.
Yeah,
Sister Atia.
I can feel and hear a kind of a sense of community from what you're saying there. I didn't hear the words creche facilities or cafe though.
We heard cafe, but not creche.
Oh, was
But
it-
we
was
didn't
it
hear
cafe?
creche.
I missed
We
it.
need a creche.
Just to see that I'm just not making it up. I don't know if you can read my tatty handwriting, but it's
Yes.
actually there.
Okay.
One of the things that we've actually, if I can just spend just 1 second, one was what we've realised is that when sisters come in, they've already got the kids. Now, how do they spend a few hours talking to the friends or a bit? For that, there is free creche facilities within the building. That's a part of our.
So Brother Shahrul, by the sounds of things, you need three things from my analysis of it. Number one, you need lots of du'as. Number two, you need lots and lots of money. And number three, you need probably a lot of volunteers. How would you now appeal to our local community here in Wolverhampton and listeners outside all over the world for those three things?
Okay, well, du'a really doesn't take cost anything. It's few moments and seconds of your life, and really this is a right one Muslim has or another Muslim for them to do du'a for them. So my request is please do du'a. Regarding the finance part of it, I just want to say how much I agree with what you said about us being a mature community here. And this project is just not there to serve the Muslim community, but the wider community, and that's a self-declared ambition. When we look at and we go to these interfaith meetings, we always find the same old faces, and it's a representative from the Muslim, the Jewish, and the Christian community, Hindu and Sikh community having a good chat over a cup of tea. You know what we really need to be, and that's the best form of da'wah, is for them to actually meet us and know and learn from us and see what we're about and what we are. That's the best form of da'wah and our character. And I hope they can see that, and that would hopefully tell them what Islam and Muslims are about. Regarding the money part, the donation, any project. I'll tell you one thing. I've lived most of my life, and I'm not going to live the number of years that I've already lived. And if I do, the quality of life will be extremely poor. But one thing I am pretty certain about is that when I do pass away from this world, I know that the world would continue for many years after me. What I want to do, and this is my definition of a legacy, it's not to leave a name and something like that, but legacy for me is defined as leaving the world a better place than what we found it. And this is an investment for our children, our grandchildren. And if we fail to do this, we will reap the problem later. And all we're asking for is very, very few pence, just £3 a month. That's our appeal. £3 a month. It's the collective power when we work together. 3.5 million Muslims. Imagine just giving £3. That's an awesome sum that we can just do overnight. And they can find out more about us on our website, ibnrushd.org.
Ibn Rushd
Center.org.
Center.org. So it's IBN RUSHD Center.org.
That's correct. Yes.
And if you Google that, no doubt the Islamic Library will turn up. Whereabouts are you in Birmingham?
We are currently in Stratford Road in Spark Hill.
Okay.
We are renting an office there. And we are in the process of identifying our site. That's one of the biggest challenges that we're finding, and getting planning permission, securing planning permission. And that's what I'm saying. If we don't do things now, imagine if we're struggling now to do it. In 10 years' time, how more difficult it's going to be. And in 20 years' time, how even more difficult things
Because,
are.
of course, in Birmingham, land value is so much
Very
expensive,
high.
especially in the city centre.
Correct.
So it's likely not to be in the city centre. You think
City
it's likely-
centre is not probably going to be a wise option for us to do, because what we think about the Muslim community is they want ease in terms of parking, ease in terms of connection and walking and accessibility. And if it's within more of a Muslim community as such, then that's more accessible for them. And that's what we want to encourage, and that's what we're trying to target.
Okay, that's excellent. And with regards to volunteers, if people want to give their support, their time to the project, if people want to, get involved with ideas, be able to be maybe some consultation you're doing or something, how would you go about that?
I can't stress this so more emphatically than this, that this project is just not possible with the small team that we have. We literally need an army of volunteers, and subhanallah, do good when you've got the opportunity to do good. Spend just few minutes, time. You don't have to even go out in the field and do it now with technology. Again, how easy it is just to receive some information and forward it onto your contact list, and sit down, just explain to them and convince them to donate and subscribe to the donation monthly. That itself is such a tremendous thing. So we are desperate, as in super duper uber desperate, okay, for volunteers. And if they can please contact us, that would be such a great thing.
Do you want to put out a telephone number from your organisation, or
absolutely? So
or just the website?
Sure, no, they can go onto our website, which is ibnrushcenter.org, and our telephone number is 0121 667 6266.
Just one more time.
So that's 0121 667 6266.
Brother Shahrul Hussain, Jazakumullah khair. That was a really useful account of the Islamic Library in Birmingham. And inshallah ta'ala, may Allah ta'ala give you every success with that project. It sounds like a very exciting project. And I'm sure that the whole of the UK population will be very proud when this final Islamic library is set up. And it will be a beacon of light, I think, not just for Muslims in the UK, but Muslims around the whole world. So may Allah ta'ala give you every success and make this great project come about to fruition.
Thank you very much.
Listeners, you're listening to Ramadan Radio Wolverhampton, 87.9 FM. My name is Yusuf Shafi, in conversation with Yusuf Shafi. We're coming up to the last 4 or 5 minutes, or 4 minutes actually, of our show. So what I usually do is ask my guests to please go around and give some lasting last messages to the listeners, some parting words. So I'm going to turn to, first of all, Brother Muhammad Rafi, our IT consultant. Would you like to please say a few words to our listeners?
Yes, thanks, Yusuf. So, in summary, IT is really complicated to summarize, but I will say one of the essentials within the domain of IT is to communicate. And on top of that, it's to network. And by network, I mean network people. And again, it's something that we don't do well within our community, is to network well. I feel everything is achievable, inshallah. Everything is achievable, inshallah. Just dream IT, work hard, and work smart.
Yeah.
And if you young people want to get in touch with you, are you accessible?
Yeah,
Masjid maybe?
so I'm regularly at the Alaska Mosque on Waterloo Road. So if anybody wants to get hold of me, you can ask around. And I'm, as I said, generally as Juma, I'm there.
MashaAllah. Dr. Shahrul.
Well, I just want to say, subhanallah, this my plea again for 2 things, well, 3 things. Dua first and foremost. Secondly, to please find it in your heart to commit to giving just £3 a month to the Ibn Rushd Centre of Excellence for Islamic Research, and to help us to create the Europe's largest Islamic library. And number 3, volunteers. We really are so desperate to hear from volunteers, people who are committed and who can spare some time. So if you are that person, please get in contact with us.
Jazakallah khair, brother. And Sister Atia.
I'd just like to say that I've really enjoyed what the guests have brought to the show today, and also that it sounds very informative and interesting in terms of the library, and it's somewhere where I would have liked to have visited, perhaps was my youth. So it sounds like a very interesting topic and some area and somewhere where I'd probably like to invest in. And for the last words, in terms of seeking knowledge from cradle to grave, I think it's really important for all of us to understand our mental health and well-being and seek support where necessary. We are contributing to our communities, our societies, our children first and foremost. So our mental health and well-being is very important, and I would say please do access services. And if you need to speak to me, you're very welcome to speak to me. You can catch me on Atiya Ali, that's Atiya Ali 3 on Twitter, and also contact the radio, Ramadan Radio.
Inshallah. So if there's any listeners out there who need to make contact with our guest tonight or want further information about it, you can just email radioramadan@wolverhampton.com, and through that we will be able to pass on their contact details to yourself and forward your messages onto them as well. So inshallah, through that we will enable people to be able to get more involved and learn more about the topics we've discussed today. In Conversation with Yusuf Shafi is really about empowerment. It's about informing. It's about allowing the community to be made aware of the events and the opportunities and the things going on in the world around us. And through that to be able to, inshallah, think and ponder and reflect and make decisions about what you're going to do in your life or how you can get involved with things. It's been wonderful to have these very good people come in, give their time in this month of Ramadan when they're fasting. Jazakallah khair, guests. It's been really a pleasure having you on in Conversation with Yusuf Shafi. Next week we're going to carry on with the theme of community empowerment, and we're going to have some community groups coming in talking about their voluntary work. My name is Yusuf Shafi. You've been listening to In Conversation with Yusuf Shafi, 87.9 FM, Ramadan Radio, Wolverhampton. في أمان الله جزاكم الله خير سبحان الله وبحمده سبحان الله وبحمده